The old upright piano appeared at the Riverside Central bus terminal on a Monday morning in early autumn. Nobody knew how it got there. The city workers arrived to find it sitting near the east entrance, its dark wooden frame scratched and worn from years of use. A small paper sign taped to the front read, "Play Me," in faded blue letters. The station manager, Mr. Wilson, scratched his balding head as he examined the mysterious instrument. His first instinct was to call someone to haul it away. The terminal was busy enough without random furniture cluttering the walkways. But as he reached for his phone, the mayor's recent email about the new street music initiative flashed in his mind. The city had been looking for ways to make public spaces more welcoming, to give them character. Maybe this piano was part of that plan. Might as well leave it for now, Mr. Wilson muttered to himself, adjusting his uniform vest. See what happens. What happened at first was not much. The morning rush hour commuters streamed past the piano without a second glance, their eyes fixed on their phones or the clock above the departure board. A few children reached out to press random keys as their parents pulled them along, creating brief discordant notes that were swallowed by the terminal's echo. By mid-morning, the piano had become just another piece of the landscape, as unremarkable as the metal benches and the vending machines. That's when Elena Vasquez first noticed it. Elena wasn't in a rush like the others. At 63, she had learned that hurrying rarely changed anything. She arrived at the bus terminal every morning at 9:15, giving herself plenty of time before the 9:40 bus that would take her to the community college where she had worked as a janitor for the past 12 years. She always sat on the same bench in the waiting area, a worn leather satchel on her lap. The satchel contained her lunch, usually a sandwich and an apple, along with a small notebook where she sometimes wrote poems or thoughts while waiting. What nobody knew was that tucked into a side pocket of that satchel were several sheets of yellowed piano music, folded and refolded so many times that the creases had become permanent. When Elena spotted the piano across the terminal, she froze mid-step. Something in her chest tightened. Without realizing it, her hand moved to the side pocket of her satchel, feeling the outline of the folded pages inside. "Where did you come from?" she whispered. A businessman rushing past bumped her shoulder, mumbling a quick apology without slowing down. Elena barely noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on the upright piano as memories flooded back. Memories she had carefully packed away decades ago, like fragile glass ornaments too precious and painful to display. For the rest of that day, Elena couldn't focus on her work. She moved through the college hallways with her cleaning cart, wiping the same spot on a door multiple times or forgetting to empty trash bins. The image of the piano at the bus terminal kept appearing in her mind, like a photograph that wouldn't fade. That night in her small apartment, Elena opened the bottom drawer of her dresser and pulled out a wooden box she hadn't touched in years. Inside were photographs. Elena as a young woman sitting at a grand piano, her posture perfect, her expression serious yet somehow alive with passion. In another photo, she stood beaming next to an older man with kind eyes and a proud smile. "My star pupil," he had called her. She put the photographs back carefully and closed the drawer. The next morning, Elena arrived at the bus terminal 15 minutes earlier than usual. The piano was still there. A young man in torn jeans sat at it briefly, playing the opening notes to a popular song before his friends called him away. Laughing, Elena circled the terminal twice, finding reasons to walk past the piano without stopping. On her third pass, her bus arrived and she boarded it with a strange mix of relief and disappointment. This pattern continued for a week. Elena would arrive early, walk near the piano, sometimes pausing to watch others play it, mostly children banging randomly on the keys, or teenagers showing off the one song they knew. But she never sat down herself. "You waiting for an invitation?" The question came from Rosie, the woman who ran the coffee kiosk near Elena's usual bench. Rosie had noticed Elena's daily orbits around the piano. Elena shook her head, smiling shyly. "No, It's been a long time. You play?" Rosie asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Elena hesitated before nodding slightly. "Well then, what are you waiting for? That thing's not getting any younger, and neither are we," Rosie said with a laugh, her voice warm and free of judgment. The next day was Saturday. Elena didn't work weekends, but she found herself taking the bus downtown anyway. The terminal was less crowded than on weekdays, with weekend travelers moving at a more leisurely pace. The piano sat unattended. Elena approached it slowly, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. Up close, she could see the wear on the keys. Some of them yellowed with age, others chipped at the edges. Without sitting, she reached out one hand and pressed a single key, middle C. The note rang out, surprisingly clear and in tune. Elena glanced around. No one was paying attention. Most people were focused on their own journeys, their own stories. Taking a deep breath, she lowered herself onto the bench. It felt both foreign and familiar, like returning to a childhood home now occupied by strangers. She placed her hands on the keys but didn't press them, simply feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. How many hours had her hands spent in this exact position throughout her life? Thousands? Tens of thousands? You gonna play that thing or just warm the seat? Elena looked up to see an older gentleman waiting for his bus, his tone more curious than unkind. I'm just remembering, she replied softly. The man nodded as if this made perfect sense and turned his attention back to his newspaper. Elena opened her satchel and took out the folded music sheets. They were Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier, the first piece her teacher had assigned her when she showed early promise. She had played it so many times she didn't need the sheet music anymore, but having it there felt like a security blanket, a connection to the person she once was. She began to play, hesitantly at first. The first few notes were stiff, mechanical, her fingers remembering the motions but lacking their old fluidity. But as she continued, something started to awaken inside her. By the middle of the piece, her hands had found their rhythm, her body swaying slightly with the music, her eyes closing as she let the familiar patterns take over. When she finished, she opened her eyes to find 3 people standing nearby watching. An older woman smiled and gave a small nod of appreciation before walking away. A young mother holding a toddler's hand said, "That was beautiful," before continuing toward her platform. Elena felt a small flame kindle inside her chest. Not pride exactly, but a flicker of something she had forgotten. The joy of creating something beautiful and sharing it with others, even if just for a moment. Over the next few days, Elena began to bring different pieces of music to the terminal. She would arrive 30 minutes before her bus, play for 20 minutes, then continue to work. Some days only a handful of people noticed. Other days, small groups would gather briefly before dispersing. To catch their buses, nobody knew that. The quiet janitor they passed in the college hallways was the same woman who filled the bus terminal with Bach and Chopin in the mornings. Elena preferred it that way. This wasn't about recognition. It was about reconnecting with a piece of herself she had buried long ago. Word began to spread among the regular commuters about the morning pianist at the east entrance. Some would plan their arrivals to coincide with Elena's playing. Mr. Wilson, the station manager who had initially considered removing the piano, now made sure it was dusted regularly and protected from spills. Elena never spoke much about her playing. When Rosie from the coffee kiosk asked where she had learned to play like that, Elena simply said she had taken lessons a long time ago. The truth that she had once been a scholarship student at one of the most prestigious music conservatories in the country remained her secret. But the piano was working its magic in other ways. Elena stood straighter now. She smiled more often. Her co-workers at the college noticed the change but couldn't pinpoint its cause. 2 weeks after she first sat down at the bus terminal piano, Elena arrived to find a small vase with fresh flowers placed on top of it. There was no note, no explanation. Just the flowers brightening the worn wood of the old instrument. As Elena began to play that morning, a gentle Debussy piece that rippled like water, she felt something unlock inside her chest. The years seemed to fall away, not erasing the hardships and disappointments that had led her here, but somehow making peace with them. The music flowed from her fingers, filling the cavernous space of the terminal, weaving between announcements of arrivals and departures. She didn't notice the well-dressed man who stopped mid-stride when he heard the music. She didn't see how he checked his expensive watch, frowned at being delayed, then moved closer despite his impatience. She was lost in the music, finding her way back to herself one note at a time. What Elena couldn't know was that in 2 days' time, this man would change everything. His laughter would cut through her concentration, bringing her crashing back to reality. And then when she played through her humiliation, he would stand transfixed, all thoughts of meetings and deadlines forgotten as he witnessed something truly extraordinary. But that moment was still to come. For now there was just Elena and the piano and the music that had waited so patiently for her return. The morning that would change everything began like any other. Elena woke at 5:30, made her bed with hospital corners, a habit from childhood, and prepared a simple breakfast of toast and coffee. She laid out her work clothes, navy slacks, a light blue button-up shirt, and comfortable shoes that could handle hours of standing. Nothing about this routine suggested the day would be different. Yet as she packed her lunch and tucked it into her leather satchel, Elena felt a strange flutter in her stomach. She paused by her small bookshelf and pulled out a worn music book she hadn't touched in years. The cover was faded, but the gold lettering still caught the light. Advanced Piano Compositions. Why not? She whispered to herself, adding it to her satchel alongside her usual folded music sheets. The morning bus ride downtown was crowded. Elena stood holding the overhead rail, lost in thought. What piece should she play today? Something more challenging, perhaps. The past 2 weeks of playing at the terminal had loosened her fingers, brought back some of her old skill. Maybe it was time to push herself a little further. The bus terminal was busier than usual when she arrived. A minor delay on one of the main routes had caused a backup, and the east entrance was filled with impatient commuters checking watches and phones. Elena hesitated when she saw the crowd around her piano. No, not her piano, she corrected herself. The terminal's piano. For a moment, she considered skipping her morning ritual. She could just go straight to work early. No one would miss her playing. But then she spotted Rosie from the coffee kiosk giving her an encouraging wave. And an elderly gentleman who had become a regular listener nodded in her direction. Elena took a deep breath and made her way through the crowd. As she approached the piano, a group of teenagers who had been leaning against it moved aside, one of them saying, "Here comes the piano lady." The piano bench was empty, waiting for her. Elena sat down, straightened her back, another habit from her training days, and opened her satchel. Today she would try something more ambitious, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Her fingers hadn't attempted this piece in nearly 20 years. As she arranged her music and flexed her fingers, Elena was vaguely aware of someone stopping nearby. From the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of an expensive suit and polished shoes. A businessman, probably waiting for the express bus to the financial district. Elena positioned her hands above the keys, took a centering breath, and began to play. The first few notes were tentative, her muscle memory still awakening. She fumbled slightly on a transition, winced, and started again from that measure. That's when she heard it, a short, sharp laugh followed by a loudly whispered comment. "What's next, a homeless symphony?" Elena's fingers froze above the keys. Her ears burned hot with embarrassment as she heard a few chuckles spread around her. She didn't turn to look at the man who had spoken, but she could feel his presence just behind her right shoulder. "Some people will do anything for attention," the voice continued, clearly meant to be heard. "Shouldn't there be a permit or something for this kind of public nuisance?" Elena's hands began to tremble. She stared at the keys, suddenly seeing not the worn ivory of the bus terminal piano, but the faces of critics from her past. Her father telling her music was a waste of time. The scholarship committee explaining why her funding had been cut after her mother got sick. Her ex-husband rolling his eyes whenever she mentioned returning to playing. "Just get on with it or move along, lady. Some of us have real jobs to get to." The voice belonged to Derek Phillips, though Elena didn't know his name. She didn't know he was the marketing director for one of the city's largest financial firms. She didn't know he was running late for a presentation that could determine whether he got the promotion he'd been chasing for 3 years. She didn't know that his alarm hadn't gone off that morning, that his coffee maker had broken, or that he'd just received a text from his boss asking where he was. All Elena knew was the shame burning through her chest and the sudden weight of every doubt she'd ever had about herself. A small voice inside her whispered, "Just get up, walk away, go to work. Forget this foolishness," but another voice, one she hadn't heard in years, spoke louder. "Show him." Elena closed her eyes. Her hands still trembled, but she placed them deliberately on the keys. Instead of the Chopin she'd planned, her fingers found the opening chords of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the piece she had played at her first recital, the piece she knew better than any other. The first notes silenced the murmurs around her. The familiar triplets flowed from her fingers, filling the terminal with their haunting melody. Elena kept her eyes closed, shutting out everything except the music. Her embarrassment melted away with each measure, replaced by the calm concentration that had once been as natural to her as breathing. Behind her, Derek Phillips's smirk faded. He had expected the woman to scurry away, to give up the piano so people could get back to their commutes without the amateur plinking. But what he was hearing now wasn't amateur at all. The mournful, flowing notes of the sonata's first movement filled the space with an intensity that seemed impossible from the old upright piano. Elena's body swayed slightly as she played. Her face transformed from the nervous, hunched woman of moments before. Her posture was now perfect, her expression serene yet somehow alive with emotion. The transformation was so complete that Derek found himself taking a step back, as if he'd been standing too close to something powerful and dangerous. Around them, the busy terminal began to change. People slowed their hurried walks. A child stopped mid-complaint to listen. The constant background noise of announcements and conversations seemed to dim, though in reality, it was just that everyone was speaking more softly, reluctant to interfere with the music. As Elena finished the first movement, she opened her eyes, surprised to find herself not in a practice room or on a concert stage of her youth, but still at the bus terminal. Without pausing, her hands moved into a different piece, this one brighter, more technically demanding. Her fingers, stiff just days ago, now flew across the keys with growing confidence. Derek glanced at his watch. His bus had come and gone. He was now officially late for his meeting. Strangely, he couldn't bring himself to care. He moved to where he could see the woman's face as she played. Who was she? With her plain clothes and sensible shoes, he had assumed she was just another invisible person in the city, maybe a cleaner or a cashier at one of the shops. Someone whose name you never bothered to learn, but her hands told a different story. Those hands belonged to someone who had spent thousands of hours mastering an instrument, someone who understood music on a level most people never reached. Those weren't the hands of a dabbler or a hobbyist. Elena was now playing Chopin's Fantaisie Impromptu, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the romantic repertoire. Her fingers blurred as they handled the rapid notes of the middle section. A small crowd had formed around the piano, commuters missing their buses without complaint, captivated by the unexpected concert. "Who is she?" someone whispered nearby. A woman who worked at the ticket counter answered, "She comes every morning. Plays for about 20 minutes, then catches the 940 to the east side. Never knew she could play like this, though. She works at City College," another voice added. "Cleaning staff, I think. My daughter goes there." Derek felt a wave of shame wash over him. He had laughed at her, mocked her publicly, all because he was having a bad morning and she had been an easy target. And now here she was playing with a skill level that would be at home in a concert hall. While he stood watching, his important meeting forgotten. As Elena moved into a third piece, even Mr. Wilson, the station manager, had emerged from his office to listen. He stood with his arms crossed, nodding appreciatively. The sounds Elena created seemed impossible from the old piano, notes that sang and whispered and thundered in turn. When she finally stopped playing, the terminal remained silent for a beat, before erupting in spontaneous applause. Elena blinked, looking almost surprised to find an audience. She hadn't been playing for them. She had been playing for herself, finding her way back to the person she once was, the person she had set aside for so many years. She stood shakily from the bench, overwhelmed by the response. People were smiling at her, a few even reaching out to touch her arm or shoulder in appreciation as she tried to make her way through the crowd. "That was incredible," a woman told her, eyes shining. "You made me miss my bus, and I don't even care." "Do you play here every day?" someone else asked. "I have to go," Elena said softly, suddenly self-conscious again. "I'll be late for work." As she gathered her music and tucked it back into her satchel, she finally came face to face with Derek, the man who had laughed at her. He stood awkwardly, his earlier confidence replaced by a look of genuine regret. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out stiffly, as if he wasn't used to saying them. "I was completely out of line." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Part of her wanted to say something cutting, to make him feel as small as he had made her feel. But the music had washed away most of her anger. "Yes, you were," she said simply. As she walked away toward her bus, Derek Phillips stood watching her go, the echo of her music still hanging in the air. Something about the whole encounter had shaken him deeply. He had been so quick to judge, so certain of his assessment of her worth. And he had been so utterly, completely wrong. What else, he wondered, was he wrong about? Elena arrived at work that day with her mind still swimming in music. The confrontation with the businessman had awakened something in her, a spark of the fierce determination she'd once possessed as a young pianist. As she pushed her cleaning cart through the college hallways, her fingers kept moving, playing invisible keys on the cart's handle. "You seem different today," said Pete, the head of maintenance, as they passed in the hallway. Pete was in his 70s with a permanent bend in his back from decades of physical labor. He had always been kind to Elena, sometimes saving her an apple from his lunch. "Different how?" Elena asked, tucking a strand of gray-streaked hair behind her ear. Pete tilted his head, considering. "Taller, maybe? Something about the way you're standing." Elena smiled but said nothing. How could she explain that for the first time in years, she remembered what it felt like to be seen, really seen, for who she was, rather than just the quiet woman who cleaned the floors? Meanwhile, across town, Derek Phillips sat in his office, staring at the presentation he'd managed to deliver despite being 30 minutes late. His boss had been surprisingly understanding. "These things happen," he'd said. But Derek couldn't shake the morning's events from his mind. He opened his laptop and typed piano bus terminal into a search engine. Nothing relevant appeared. He tried again with the name of the city added. Still nothing. Of course, it had just happened that morning. What was he expecting? But something about the woman's playing had gotten under his skin. The way she had transformed before his eyes from someone he would have passed without noticing into. What, an artist? A maestro? The word seemed too grand and yet too small at the same time. Derek had grown up with money and privilege. His parents had insisted on piano lessons when he was young, which he'd endured rather than enjoyed. He knew enough about music to recognize that what he'd witnessed that morning was exceptional. And he had mocked her. The memory made him wince. The next morning, Elena arrived at the bus terminal 15 minutes earlier than usual. She half expected the piano to be gone, as if yesterday's events had been some strange dream, but it was still there, waiting. What she didn't expect was to see the man who had laughed at her, Derek, standing nearby, a takeaway coffee cup in each hand. When he spotted her, he straightened up and took a hesitant step forward. "Good morning," he said, his voice formal, different from the mocking tone of yesterday. "I brought you coffee." He held out one of the cups. "I didn't know how you'd take it, so I got it black. There's sugar and cream if you want it." He gestured to the small packets in his pocket. Elena looked at him warily, not taking the coffee. "Why?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "I was completely out of line yesterday. I was having a bad morning, but that's no excuse." "I'm sorry." The apology seemed genuine. Elena accepted the coffee with a small nod, though she placed it on top of the piano untouched. "My name's Derek," he said, extending his hand. "Elena." She shook his hand briefly, then sat at the piano bench and began arranging her music. Derek didn't leave. He stood awkwardly to one side, watching as she organized her sheets. "Do you mind if I stay to listen?" "Properly this time?" Elena shrugged. "It's a public space." The terminal was beginning to fill with the morning commuters. A few regulars nodded to Elena as they passed, some slowing their pace when they realized she was about to play. After yesterday, word had spread. Elena placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. Today she chose Debussy's Clair de Lune, its dreamlike melody rising above the terminal noise. As she played, she was aware of Derek watching her, but soon the music carried her away as it always did. The piece was gentle, flowing like water, building slowly to its climax before receding again. Elena's fingers remembered every note, every subtle change in tempo and dynamics. She'd played this piece for her mother in the hospital during her final days. The memory brought both pain and comfort. When she finished, the small crowd that had gathered applauded warmly. Elena nodded her acknowledgement, then surprised herself by moving directly into another piece. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, a far more technically demanding composition. It was as if her fingers were challenging themselves, seeing how far they could push after years of neglect. The contrast was striking. Where Clair de Lune was delicate and flowing, the Liszt piece was fiery and dramatic, requiring rapid hand movements and precise timing. The old piano's keys resisted slightly, making the piece even more challenging than it would have been on a well-maintained instrument. But Elena persevered, her face a study in concentration. Derek watched in amazement. He knew enough about music to recognize the difficulty of what she was playing. His own piano teachers had never assigned him anything close to this level. As her hands flew across the keyboard, creating thunderous chords one moment and delicate trills the next, he found himself wondering about the path that had led her from what was clearly professional-level training to playing at a bus terminal in clothes that suggested a life far removed from concert halls. The crowd around the piano had grown. Several people had their phones out recording Elena's performance. Mr. Wilson, the station manager, stood at the edge of the gathering, a pleased expression on his face. This piano, which he had nearly removed, was now becoming a feature of the terminal. When Elena finished the Liszt piece, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Even the station's announcements seemed to pause for a moment, as if in appreciation. Elena looked up, a bit startled by the response. Her cheeks flushed with color. "That was incredible," Derek said, his voice sincere. "Where did you study?" The question caught Elena off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her training, had recognized that she must have had formal education. "Curtis Institute," she answered quietly. "A long time ago." Derek's eyebrows rose. Even he knew that the Curtis Institute of Music was one of the most selective conservatories in the world. "What happened?" he asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. "I'm sorry, that's probably too personal." Elena shook her head slightly. "Life happened." She began gathering her music, glancing at her watch. "I need to catch my bus. Will you be here tomorrow?" Derek asked. "I'm here every morning," Elena replied. "But I should warn you, I'm not always this good. Sometimes my fingers won't do what I ask them to." "It's been a long time." "How long?" Elena paused, calculating. "I haven't played regularly in about 20 years. 20 years. The number hung in the air between them. Derek tried to imagine giving up something he loved for 2 decades. He couldn't. "Well," he said finally, "you sound like you never stopped." A small smile touched the corner of Elena's mouth. "Thank you." She closed her satchel and stood. "I really do have to go." As she walked away, Derek found himself calling after her. "Elena, what if you had better conditions? A better piano?" She turned back, a questioning look on her face. "I mean," Derek continued, "this old upright isn't exactly worthy of your talent. What if you had a proper instrument?" "It doesn't matter," Elena said with a small shrug. "I play for myself, not for the quality of the sound." But as she boarded her bus, Elena found herself wondering about Derek's question. What would it be like to play on a grand piano again, with properly weighted keys and true resonance? The thought both excited and terrified her. At work that day, Elena found a note taped to her locker. "Please see me in my office. Dean Richards." Her stomach tightened. Had someone complained about her? Was there a problem with her work? She knocked tentatively on the dean's door during her lunch break. "Come in, come in." The dean was a cheerful woman in her 50s, who always wore bright scarves regardless of the season. Today's was a vibrant purple. "Elena, please sit down." Elena perched on the edge of the chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "I received the most interesting phone call this morning," the dean said, smiling. "Someone sent me a video of you playing piano at the bus terminal. Did you know people were recording you?" Elena felt her face grow hot. "No, I didn't. Well, they were. And the video is quite something." The dean tapped her computer screen. "The music department is buzzing about it." Professor Chen nearly fell out of his chair when he saw it. "I don't understand," Elena said. "Am I in trouble?" The dean laughed. "Trouble? No, no. Quite the opposite." She leaned forward. "Elena, why didn't you ever tell us you were a concert-level pianist?" "It was a long time ago," Elena said softly. "I haven't played seriously in years." "Well, you could have fooled me, and Professor Chen, who's not easily impressed." The dean adjusted her bright scarf. "He'd like to meet you, by the way. And I have a proposition for you if you're interested." "A proposition? How would you feel about playing for our students?" "Nothing formal, just an informal lunchtime recital. The music department has a beautiful Steinway that's hardly used this time of year." Elena's heart began to race. A Steinway. A real concert grand piano. Her fingers tingled at the thought. I don't know," she stammered. "I'm very out of practice." Not from what I saw, the dean said kindly. Think about it at least. No pressure. But I think our students would love it, and frankly, so would our faculty. As Elena left the office, her mind was spinning. First the confrontation with Derek, now this invitation from the dean. After years of quiet routine, her life seemed to be changing at a dizzying pace, all because of an old piano in a bus terminal. That night, for the first time in years, Elena dreamed of music. In her dream, she was playing on a gleaming grand piano in a room filled with light. And somewhere in the audience, a man who had once laughed at her was now watching in respectful silence, his mocking smile replaced by genuine admiration. The next few days passed in a blur for Elena. Each morning, she arrived at the bus terminal to find a growing audience waiting for her. Some were regular commuters who had adjusted their schedules to hear her play. Others were newcomers who had heard about the piano lady from friends or family. On Thursday morning, she spotted a woman with a professional camera filming her performance. When Elena finished playing, the woman approached her with a business card. I'm from the local news, she explained. Would you be willing to do a short interview? Your story is exactly the kind of uplifting piece our viewers love. Elena instinctively shook her head. I'm not comfortable with that, she said softly. I'm just playing for myself, really. The reporter looked disappointed but nodded respectfully. If you change your mind, please call me. Sometimes sharing your gift can inspire others. As the reporter walked away, Derek appeared at Elena's side. He had been there every morning that week, arriving early with a coffee for her, which she now accepted, and staying to listen to her play before heading to work. You turned down the interview? He asked. Elena nodded, packing her music sheets into her satchel. I don't want to be on television. I'm not looking for attention. Derek studied her face. You know, most people would jump at the chance for their moment in the spotlight. I'm not most people, Elena replied simply. She checked her watch. I need to go. The dean is expecting me at lunchtime. Today was the day of her informal recital at the college. The dean had arranged for Elena to have an hour with the music department's Steinway before any students or faculty arrived. Just to get comfortable with the instrument, she'd said. Good luck, Derek said, though you don't need it. Elena gave him a small smile. Thank you for the coffee. As she walked toward her bus, Derek called after her. Elena? Would it be all right if I came to hear you play? At the college, I mean. The question surprised her. Why would you want to? Derek shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. I'd like to hear what you sound like on a proper piano. Elena considered for a moment. It's at noon in the music building, room 103. The music room was empty when Elena arrived, just as the dean had promised. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the grand piano in the center of the room, a magnificent Steinway Model D, its black surface gleaming. Elena approached it slowly, almost reverently. It had been so long since she'd played an instrument of this caliber. The bus terminal's upright piano, with its worn keys and slightly out-of-tune strings, was a child's toy compared to this. She sat on the bench, adjusting its height, then placed her hands on the keys without pressing them. The ivory felt cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. She took a deep breath and began to play, just scales at first, getting a feel for the action of the keys, which responded to the lightest touch. The sound that filled the room was rich and full, each note resonating perfectly. Elena closed her eyes, losing herself in the pure pleasure of the instrument. She moved from scales into a simple Bach prelude, then gradually into more complex pieces as her confidence grew. Time disappeared as she played. The world narrowed to just her hands and the keyboard, each note flowing into the next. She didn't hear the door open, didn't realize anyone had entered until she finished a piece and heard a soft bravo from behind her. Elena turned to see an older Asian man standing by the door, his eyes bright with emotion behind wire-rimmed glasses. Please don't stop on my account, he said. I'm Professor Chen. The dean told me you might be here. He moved closer, his step slow and measured. May I? He gestured to a chair near the piano. Elena nodded, suddenly nervous. Professor Chen was the head of the music department, a renowned pianist in his own right, who had performed with orchestras around the world before turning to teaching. What were you playing just now? He asked. Schubert, impromptu in G-flat major. Ah, he nodded appreciatively. One of my favorites. Your interpretation was most interesting. You don't play it as most people do? I'm sorry, Elena said quickly. I'm very out of practice, Professor Chen shook his head. No apologies. Different is not wrong. You play it with more restraint than most, which gives the climactic moments greater impact. He studied her face. The dean tells me you studied at Curtis. A long time ago. I didn't graduate. May I ask why? Elena hesitated. She rarely spoke about that period of her life, but something about the professor's gentle manner made her want to explain. My mother got sick during my second year. Cancer. I came home to help care for her and my younger brothers. By the time she passed, I'd lost my scholarship. And then life just happened. Work, marriage, divorce. The piano became a memory. Professor Chen nodded slowly. Yet here you are playing beautifully after all these years. The music never left you? I suppose not. Would you play something else for me? Something that challenges you? Elena thought for a moment, then nodded. She positioned her hands and launched into Liszt's La Campanella, one of the most technically difficult pieces in the piano repertoire. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence across the keys, the notes flowing like water. The Steinway responded beautifully, its rich tone filling the room with sound that seemed to dance in the air. When she finished, Professor Chen was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You have a rare gift, Ms. Vasquez. Technique can be taught, but the soul with which you play, that comes from somewhere else." Elena felt her cheeks flush with the praise. "Our students are fortunate to hear you today," he continued. "But I wonder if you might consider something more." "More?" Elena asked. "We have a small concert series each semester, faculty performances mostly with occasional guest artists. Would you consider playing? A short program, perhaps 30 minutes. Elena's heart raced at the suggestion. A real concert after all these years? The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't think I'm ready for that," she said. Professor Chen smiled gently. "Few artists ever feel truly ready. But from what I just heard, you are more than capable." He stood. "Think about it. No need to decide now." As he walked to the door, he paused. "Oh, and there's a young man outside asking if he might come in. Says his name is Derek." Elena nodded. "Yes, he can come in." When Derek entered, his eyes immediately went to the magnificent piano. "Wow," he said softly. "That's quite an instrument." "It is," Elena agreed. She glanced at the clock. "The students will be arriving soon." Derek took a seat at the back of the room. "I won't disturb you. I just wanted to hear what you sound like on a real piano." More people began to filter into the room, students with curious expressions, faculty members who greeted Professor Chen with respect. The dean arrived, her purple scarf bright against her dark suit, and gave Elena an encouraging smile. By noon, the room was full. The dean stepped forward to introduce Elena, keeping it simple. "Today we have a special treat. Elena Vasquez, who some of you may know from our maintenance staff, is also an accomplished pianist. She has graciously agreed to play for us today." Elena sat at the piano, her heart pounding. She hadn't performed for a proper audience in decades. Looking out at the expectant faces, she spotted Derek at the back, giving her a thumbs up. The gesture, somehow both silly and sincere, calmed her nerves. She began with Debussy's Arabesque No. 1, its flowing notes creating a dreamlike atmosphere. The audience sat in perfect silence, many with closed eyes, letting the music wash over them. Elena's fingers remembered every note, every subtle dynamic change. The magnificent Steinway responded to her lightest touch, filling the room with sound so beautiful it almost hurt. For the next 40 minutes, Elena played piece after piece, Chopin, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, each one flowing naturally from her fingers as if she had never stopped practicing. The audience remained spellbound, erupting into applause only when she finally stood from the bench, her face flushed with emotion. Professor Chen was the first to approach her. "Magnificent," he said simply. "The offer of a concert stands. In fact, I insist." Students gathered around, asking questions about her training, her favorite composers, how long she had been playing. Elena answered them all with a growing confidence, surprised by how easily the technical language of music returned to her. One student, a young woman with bright red hair, asked, "How did you end up playing at the bus terminal?" "It was just there," Elena explained. "An old piano with a Play Me sign. I hadn't touched a keyboard in years, but something about it called to me." "I'm so glad it did," the student said. "You've inspired me to practice harder. I was thinking of giving up, but hearing you today—" "Well, thank you. As the crowd dispersed, Derek made his way to the piano. "That was incredible," he said. "Truly, I had no idea what you were capable of when I first saw you at the terminal." "Few people do," Elena replied. "Sometimes we don't even know ourselves." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I have a proposition for you. My company is hosting a charity gala next month. We're still looking for entertainment. Would you consider playing? It pays well, and it would be a tremendous opportunity." Elena hesitated. "I don't know, Derek. Today was just an informal recital. A gala is different." "After what I just heard, you could play Carnegie Hall," he insisted. "Think about it at least. We could make sure you have access to a good piano for practice. And," he added with a slight smile, "it would be a great way to show some of my colleagues who laughed at my bus terminal pianist story what they missed." Before Elena could answer, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Pete, the head of maintenance. "Check your email when you get a chance. Someone sent something about you to the whole staff." With a sense of foreboding, Elena pulled up her email on her phone. There it was. A message from someone in the administration office with the subject line, "Our own hidden talent." The body of the email contained a link to a video titled, "Bus Stop Piano Lady Reveals Stunning Talent." Elena clicked the link with trembling fingers. The video showed her playing at the bus terminal earlier that week. Someone had recorded her without her knowledge and posted it online. The view count was already over 50,000. "Oh no," she whispered. Derek leaned over to see what had upset her. "Is that you? That's amazing, Elena. You're going viral." "I didn't want this," she said, her voice tight. "I didn't ask for this attention." "But this is wonderful," Derek insisted. "People should hear you play. Your talent deserves recognition." Elena shook her head. "You don't understand. I've spent years being invisible, and I was comfortable that way. Now suddenly everyone's looking at me, expecting things from me." Her hands were shaking slightly. "I just wanted to play the piano again. I wasn't looking to become this." As she gathered her things to leave, the dean approached with an excited expression. "Elena, have you seen the video?" "It's everywhere." "The president of the college just called me. He wants to discuss creating a special position for you, artist in residence or something similar." Elena felt the room spinning slightly. Everything was moving too fast, changes rushing at her from all sides. Just days ago she had been anonymous, invisible, just the quiet woman who cleaned the floors and occasionally played an old piano while waiting for her bus. Now suddenly everyone wanted something from her. Everyone had plans for her. Everyone was watching. As she walked out of the music building, Elena wondered if she had made a terrible mistake in ever sitting down at that bus terminal piano. Elena didn't go to the bus terminal the next morning. Or the morning after that. She took the later bus to work, the one that stopped at the south entrance where there was no piano, no waiting audience, and no Derek with his coffee and encouragement. At work, people looked at her differently. Professors who had never noticed her before stopped to chat. Students whispered and pointed as she pushed her cleaning cart through the hallways. The college president sent her an email requesting a meeting to discuss exciting opportunities. Elena didn't reply. On the third day of avoiding the terminal, she found Pete waiting by her locker. "You're hiding," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena sighed as she put away her coat. "I just want things to go back to normal." Pete's weathered face crinkled in a gentle smile. "Normal is overrated. And besides, that ship has sailed." He pulled out his phone and showed her the view count on her video. "Over 2 million now. I never asked for any of this," Elena said. "Most of life's biggest changes come without an invitation," Pete replied. "The question is what you do with them." Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Missing your music at the terminal. Are you okay?" She put the phone away without answering. Pete noticed. "That the young man from the video? The one who laughed at you?" Elena looked up in surprise. "You watched it?" "Course I did. Everyone has." Pete shook his head. What a fool that fella was, though he seemed to realize it pretty quick. "He's been kind since then," Elena admitted. "But he doesn't understand why I'm uncomfortable with all this attention." "And why is that exactly?" Pete asked, leaning against the lockers. Most folks would be thrilled. Elena was quiet for a moment, trying to put into words the feeling that had been gnawing at her since the video went viral. "When I was young, music was everything to me," she finally said. "I dreamed of concerts and recordings and tours. But life had other plans. When I had to leave school to care for my mother, I was heartbroken. But over time, I built a different life, a quiet life. And I found peace in that quietness. She gestured around at the maintenance area. This job, it's simple and straightforward. I know what's expected of me. At the end of the day, I can see what I've accomplished. Playing at the terminal was just for me, a private joy. Now suddenly everyone wants something from me, and it feels like... She struggled to find the words. Like you're losing control of your own story, Pete suggested. Exactly. Elena nodded, grateful for his understanding. And I'm afraid. Of what? Of failing again. Of disappointing people. Of reaching for something and having it taken away. She looked down at her hands, the hands of a cleaner that still remembered how to create beauty. I'm not the young woman I was when I studied at Curtis. I don't know if I can be what everyone suddenly expects me to be. Pete considered this. You know, my wife used to say that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing the thing anyway. Your wife sounds wise. Smartest person I ever knew. Pete agreed with a sad smile. Been gone 10 years now, but I still hear her voice clear as day. He straightened up. Listen, Elena, nobody can tell you what to do here. But I think you've been given a rare gift, a second chance at something you love. Not many people get that in this life. Elena nodded slowly. I need to think. Take all the time you need, Pete said. But not too much. That young man at the terminal looks like he could use a good cup of coffee and some Bach. After her shift ended, Elena didn't go home. Instead, she found herself walking to the music building. The practice rooms would be empty this late in the day. She needed to think, and somehow thinking had always been clearer with her hands on piano keys. The building was quiet, most students and faculty gone for the day. Elena slipped into a small practice room with an upright piano. Not the grand Steinway from the recital, but a decent instrument nonetheless. She sat on the bench and began to play softly. Not anything in particular, just letting her fingers wander where they wanted. As the music flowed, her mind cleared. What did she really want? The quiet life she had built for herself had been safe, but was it fulfilling? The joy she felt when playing for the recital, that had been real. The student who said she'd inspired her, that connection had been real too, but the attention, the expectations, the pressure to be someone she wasn't sure she could be anymore, that frightened her. Elena was so lost in thought she didn't hear the practice room door open. It wasn't until a voice spoke that she realized she wasn't alone. There you are. Elena's hands stilled on the keys as she turned to see Derek standing in the doorway. How did you find me? She asked. I didn't, not exactly. I came to speak with the dean about the gala, and I heard someone playing. I'd recognize your style anywhere now. He hesitated. May I come in? Elena nodded, moving over on the bench to make room. Derek sat beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. You've been avoiding me, he said, and the terminal. Yes, because of the video? Elena sighed. Because of everything. It's all happening so fast. Derek was quiet for a moment. I think I understand now. When I first met you, or rather when I first mocked you, I saw only what I expected to see, someone not worth noticing. Then when I heard you play, I swung to the other extreme. I saw only the brilliant musician, the hidden talent. But neither view was complete, was it? You're both those things and more. Elena looked at him in surprise. What I'm trying to say, Derek continued, is that I've been focusing on what your talent means to me, or to an audience, or to the world. I haven't considered what it means to you. No one has, Elena said softly. So tell me, Derek said, what does playing mean to you? Not what it meant when you were young, but now, today? The question caught her off guard. Elena thought about the first time she'd sat at the terminal piano, how her hands had remembered what her mind had tried to forget. She thought about the peace that came with losing herself in the music, the way time seemed to stop when she played. It feels like coming home, she finally said. Like finding a part of myself I thought was gone forever. Derek nodded. Then that's what matters. Not recitals or concerts or viral videos, just you and the music. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she'd given in days. When did you get so wise? About 5 minutes after I stopped being an idiot at the bus terminal, Derek replied with a self-deprecating grin. Look, I came here today to apologize again, not just for laughing at you that day, but for pushing you toward things you might not want. The charity gala, the publicity, that's all my world. Not necessarily yours. He stood up from the bench. Whatever you decide to do, play just for yourself at the terminal, give concerts, teach anything. It should be your choice. No pressure from me or anyone else. As he turned to leave, Elena found herself calling after him. Derek, thank you. He paused at the door. For what? For seeing me. The real me, he smiled. It's been my privilege. The next morning, Elena arrived at the bus terminal at her usual time. The piano sat waiting, its worn wood gleaming softly in the early light. A small crowd had gathered nearby, regular commuters who had missed her playing. A few students from the college, even Mr. Wilson, the station manager, with his arms folded expectantly. And there was Derek. 2 coffee cups in hand, a tentative smile on his face. As Elena approached, the crowd parted to make way for her. No one spoke, but the anticipation in the air was palpable. She sat at the piano bench, adjusted her position, and took a deep breath. Then, instead of taking out her sheet music, she simply placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The piece was Beethoven's Für Elise. Simple, recognizable, beloved. Not the most technically challenging piece she knew, but one filled with emotion. As she played, Elena looked around at the faces watching her. Not with the fear and hesitation she'd felt before, but with a new sense of connection. These weren't critics judging her performance. They were simply people finding a moment of beauty in an ordinary day. When she finished, the applause was warm but brief. A few people wiped away tears. Others simply nodded their thanks before hurrying off to catch their buses. Life went on, but for a few minutes it had been touched by something timeless. Derek handed her the coffee. Welcome back. Elena accepted it with a smile. It's good to be back. So what happens next, he asked. With your music, I mean. Elena took a sip of her coffee before answering. I'm meeting with the college president tomorrow. They want to create a position for me. Part-time teaching, part-time artist in residence. I'd still clean the music building, though. Really? You'd keep cleaning? She nodded. I like the work. It's honest, and it keeps me grounded. She gave him a mischievous smile. Besides, someone has to make sure those practice rooms stay in decent shape. Derek laughed. And what about performances? Professor Chen mentioned a concert series. One step at a time, Elena said. I'm playing a short program next month. Just 30 minutes. She hesitated. And I told the dean I'd consider your charity gala if the offer still stands. It absolutely does, Derek assured her. No pressure, though. No pressure, Elena agreed. She glanced at her watch. Time for my bus. As she gathered her things, a young girl approached the piano, looking at it longingly. Do you want to try? Elena asked her. The girl nodded shyly. I'm just starting lessons. I'm not very good yet. Everyone starts somewhere, Elena said, moving over on the bench to make room. Here, I'll show you something simple. As Elena guided the girl's small hands on the keys, teaching her a basic melody, Derek watched from a distance. The scene before him was a perfect full circle. The woman who had been mocked for daring to play was now inviting another to share in the joy of music. Life rarely gave such perfect moments of redemption. Yet here it was, unfolding before him in the unlikeliest of places. A busy bus terminal, an old piano with a "Play Me" sign, and a woman who had found the courage to be truly seen. As the simple melody filled the air, passengers hurrying past slowed their steps just for a moment to listen, and in that brief pause, in that shared experience of beauty, the world seemed a little less cold, a little more connected, and infinitely more wonderful.